All right, today we're jumping into a really important topic, something that causes a ton of pain and misunderstanding for people with ADHD, the idea that they're just lazy.
Yeah, this one stings. You could do better if you cared. So many people with ADHD, especially when they're kids, hear this constantly. And, it's usually said with good intentions, right? To try and light a fire under them. But it's just built on a complete misunderstanding of what's going on.
So, what if it has nothing to do with caring at all? What if the problem is actually neurological? That's what we're going to get into right now. The science that shows why that lazy label isn't just wrong, it's actually really, really harmful. Okay, so let's get right into it. To really wrap our heads around why ADHD is not about being lazy, we've got to look past what we see on the outside and peek under the hood at what's actually firing or misfiring inside the brain. So from the outside, it looks like classic procrastination, right? Someone's just putting off a task. But inside, it's a totally different story. For the person with ADHD, it often feels like complete paralysis. They're totally overwhelmed, maybe stuck in a loop of overthinking, or they literally just can't figure out where to even begin. That's executive dysfunction in action. And this is the one that trips everyone up. The idea that, hey, you can do it when you want to. We've all heard that one. But here's the neurological fact. It's got nothing to do with effort or willpower. It's about how the brain regulates attention. Performance can be super inconsistent because it's influenced by things like interest, urgency, and dopamine levels. It's not some switch you can just flip on and off. So why this huge disconnect between what we see and what's happening? Well, the ADHD brain is basically in a constant battle. It's fighting off distractions from both inside and out, dealing with this intense mental exhaustion and struggling to just turn the thought I should do this into the action of actually doing it. And sometimes, yeah, it hyperfocuses like a laser beam, but on the completely wrong thing. The bottom line is, a massive amount of energy is being used, but you just can't see it from the outside. Okay, so now let's talk about the fallout from this misunderstanding, because it creates this really damaging cycle, especially for kids who are just starting to figure out who they are. And this is how that trap gets set. It starts with the child struggling because of their ADHD symptoms. Then, an adult, maybe a parent or teacher, calls it laziness. The kid feels ashamed, discouraged, and what happens when you feel that way? Your motivation tanks, your performance gets even worse, and then the adults see that and think, see, I was right, they are lazy. It's a terrible self-fulfilling prophecy. And the long-term damage here it's huge. We're talking about a kid who grows up with a deeply negative self-image, believing they're just not good enough. They develop this crippling fear of failure. It puts a massive strain on their relationships. And maybe worst of all, their actual ADHD might get missed entirely, so they never get the help and support they desperately need. And it leads to this kind of heartbreaking internal logic. A kid starts thinking, look, if I try my hardest and I still fail, I'm just going to get yelled at anyway. So maybe it's better if I just don't even try. That avoidance looks like laziness from the outside, but really it's a defense mechanism. It's a way to protect themselves from feeling like a failure over and over again. So the big question is, how do we stop this cycle in its tracks? Well, it all starts with changing how we look at these behaviors. We need to shift our whole perspective from one of judgment to one of, well, just being curious. This is such a useful way to reframe things. You see a messy room and think, they just don't care. But the real reason is a struggle with executive function. You see them forget a date and think, they're so irresponsible, when really it's a working memory challenge. They're zoning out in a conversation. It's not that they aren't trying to listen. Their brain is struggling to regulate its own attention. It's about swapping out that moral judgment for a neurological reason. That shift alone is a game changer. At the very core of this whole problem is this one totally flawed belief that if there's no result, there must have been no effort. But in the world of ADHD, that could not be more wrong. A huge amount of effort is invisible. It's happening inside the brain. And that invisible effort doesn't always lead to the neat, tidy outcome we expect. Okay, so understanding is step one. That's huge. But step two is just as critical. We have to change how we respond. We've got to move away from shame and start offering real, genuine support. And a lot of that comes down to language. Think about it. We switch out the old language, the character judgment, lazy, for new language that describes a state. Instead of "you're lazy," it becomes "you seem really overwhelmed," or maybe "you're undersupported right now," or simply "your brain works differently." See how that opens up a conversation instead of just shutting it down?
So instead of the accusatory, "why isn't this done yet?" imagine asking questions like these. "Hey, how can I help you break this down into smaller pieces?" Or, "What's the absolute hardest part about just getting started?" Or even, "What would make this feel even a little bit more doable for you?" These questions turn you into a teammate instead of a judge. It's all about collaboration, not confrontation.
Look, if there's just one thing you take away from all this, please let it be this. It is not a lack of caring. People with ADHD often care a lot, sometimes an overwhelming amount. The struggle isn't a lack of will or desire, it's a neurological condition that creates a gap between what they want to do and what they're able to do. And our job is to help them build a bridge over that gap.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. How might looking through this lens of understanding instead of judgment, how might that change just one single interaction you have this week? Whether that's with your kid, a friend, a colleague, or maybe even with yourself. Something to think about. Thanks for watching.